What is happening, everybody? Welcome into Believe in Kentucky alongside Cole Park. My name is Vinny Hardy, and we talk all things UK athletics. And Cole, man, it is bye week number one already, man.
Yeah, early time for it. Not quite as early as I believe Louisville's was. I think Louisville was on a bye week last week, which is insane to me that you're on a bye week 3. What are we doing here? I mean, granted they get 2 of them now, but even for Kentucky, both of them feel pretty early. I mean, if you look ahead at the schedule, they got this bye week this week, then they go to South Carolina, to Georgia, and then they're back on a bye week, and they end the season with 7 straight games. So a bit of a weird way that worked out. But nonetheless, Stoops said today, they're going on a big focus this weekend on recruiting. They're practicing a full week of practice, physical practice, kind of still tinkering some stuff with their team. But, I asked him today, actually, I said, having to do one of your recruiting trips for your bye weeks this early in the season, is that a benefit, get ahead of it with some of these guys, or is it a detriment that you won't get to talk to them as much later in the year? And his answer was kind of, I don't know. We'll see. All I can really do is play the cards I'm dealt. So we'll see how it goes. It is interesting that there's a bye week this early, but that's the way it goes. And we have an off week ahead of South Carolina.
So, yeah, exactly. The return trip down to Columbia, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, would Coder Bowley be making his first SEC start in amongst the Gamecocks and the Sandstorm and the Williams-Brice craziness that there's going to face on that Saturday night. He started against Eastern Michigan, and
I was wrong. We did see a Bo Allen appearance. So.
I mean, every now and then you get one wrong to prove that you're like human and all that kind of stuff. So that was one of those times, man.
It was. They went up big there, and they ended up letting Bo Allen go in there to pretty much just hand it off to Jason Patterson and finish that game off there. So good on Bo Allen to get on the field, late in his career there. Good on Jason Patterson to score his first ever collegiate touchdown. Offensively, I think, even though, there's always things you can work on, there's things the staff wasn't as happy with. Offensively, that game against Eastern Michigan was exactly what we wanted it to be, right? Cutter went out there, he slung the rock, he hit guys deep. You had a lot of guys. Fred Farrier the second had a 33-yard rush, I believe, or pass, I believe. Most of that was yards after catch, but I believe Hardly Gilmore had a big one there. Jamori had a big one. Obviously, who could forget the Cutter Boys roommates, Willie Rodriguez and Josh Caddis there, both getting in the end zone, first passing touchdowns of the season for the Wildcats. And then on the flip side, you had Seth McGowan out here looking like prime Benny Snell, 3 touchdowns in one game. He looks fantastic, and he does it on only 104 yards, which is amazing to me. 104 yards, found the end zone 3 times. That's a testament to how much they were slinging the ball out there in the passing game. But he looks great. He's on pace right now to break Benny Snell. He's actually a crazy stat. I put it out during the game. He's currently on pace he has 6 touchdowns in 3 games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's currently on pace to break Benny Snell's all-time rushing touchdowns record, which is 19 at Kentucky. And someone asked me after the game, they're like, well, I thought Ray Davis broke that. No, Ray Davis broke the all-time all-purpose touchdowns in a season, with 21. He had, I believe, 6 receiving touchdowns as well as 15, I guess, rushing touchdowns. So the record for rushing touchdowns still stands. Benny Snell, 19. But what's crazy is the way McGowan's playing, he's on pace to break Ray Davis's record as well. 6 touchdowns in 3 games. Obviously, we're not accounting for a harder SEC schedule, but he's on pace to get 24, which would be 3 more than Ray Davis got. So he's on pace to break both records. And we'll see if he can keep up that production. Obviously, he got leaned on a lot more heavily with Dante Dowdell going down with, I believe, a thigh bruise. So He was, we were told after the game he was able to return. They just wanted to kind of be precautionary. Didn't want him to hurt it any worse. Just say, hey, respectfully, we don't really need you against Eastern Michigan right now, so we'll let it go. Defensively, there were a bit more concerns. We'll see how Brad White gets that fixed. I put out a story for the Cat's Paws. He was pretty furious after that one.
Yeah.
All very strong words. But overall, you wanted to see you go into the Eastern Michigan week saying, all right, we need to figure out the offense. I needed to see Kentucky look good offensively, and they did. I just didn't expect it to come at the compromise of looking quite bad defensively. And that's no diss to EMU. They have a strong offense. They're working on establishing their run game. Noah Kim, obviously a former Power 5 guy at their quarterback. They have those guys through the portal on their team. They got some great receivers. They have a good passing attack, but not what you want to see out of Kentucky's defense, especially getting into the SEC. But something I also thought was interesting about the offense, Bush Hamden really emphasized earlier in the week. He said we cannot be one-dimensional. We need to be versatile. We got to be able to mix it up. Kentucky finished that game with 492 yards of offense, 240 through the air, 252 on the ground, and that's emphasized by a fourth quarter that was very rush heavy. If you go look at the quarter and half cumulatives, the first half, Kentucky had 246 yards of total offense, 123 in the air, 123 on the ground. Doesn't get a whole lot better than that.
Like Stoops' favorite word is balance. He's always talking balance. That's pretty much down the middle as you can get, man, for sure. And maybe, if we've all seen the circus where they're spinning plates, and you get two or three really spinning and then a couple down here wobbling, and it's kind of what we are seeing. You see the offense and hey, 40 plus points, what you want to see against that type of competition. And then the defense, is it a one-off? Is it a clunker? Guys just not locked in, not engaged. You hope that's what it is. And so, yeah, you got the offense almost hanging 50, and then the defense kind of, giving up scoring drives and yards and things of that nature. Brad White's usually pretty even-keeled. When he's pissed, hey, that kind of tells you what you need to know. So he's going to get after it on this bye week. He mentioned guys coming off the field. My bad. I missed that. My bad. So maybe it was just not locked in, not, the focus wasn't where it should be. That's why he gets paid what he gets paid, to kind of decipher what the problems were. And, you're not playing Eastern Michigan in 2 weeks. So the level of competition goes back up, and, you can't show up in the conference the way you did against EMU.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. I said it, I believe, on radio earlier this week, and I also said it in a story I wrote. I said, if you had told somebody before the game that Kentucky did not cover the 26.5 point spread against Eastern Michigan, they would have said, because the offense can't score enough, not because the defense let up too many points. That's not what you expected to be the result. But, yeah, I mean, Brad kind of seemed to imply they got off to a hot start, right? An interception on the very first play of the game, the fourth first quarter interception of the season for Kentucky in 3 games. Obviously, Tarian Nichols makes a fantastic play to get that one popped up. Daverin Rayner comes down with it. The veteran there got the green dot for the coach's communication. That's a leader on that defense, comes down with the ball. But, you had the hot start, and then it kind of seemed to indicate that maybe it was some mental errors. Maybe the guys just, for lack of a better term, weren't taking it too seriously. They're like, this is Eastern Michigan, And he said, he got asked kind of point blank. Someone put him on the spot and was like, so you don't have any reason why this is happening? And he kind of shut that down pretty quickly. He said, no, I know why it's happening. He said, I've got some ideas. I'm just going to keep that in-house. I'm going to handle that. I'm not going to air that out. And also emphasized this week is no happy-go-lucky bye week, I believe is what he said. So going to be a lot of work. Do not envy those defensive guys, the work they're putting in this week. Stoops seemed to indicate today, he said they have responded, which is good to hear. Hopefully, obviously that's going to be you can't really overlook South Carolina that way at South Carolina. So Hopefully that those focus issues don't persist. Hopefully, some of those leaders in that group kind of step up and keep those guys right. But against EMU, maybe the focus wasn't there. And then obviously, for the sake of fairness, we do need to say, obviously, they're still without DJ Waller. They've been leaning really heavily on JQ Hardaway and Terion Nichols at DB. Terion Nichols, like Dante Dowdell, also comes out of that game. Another case where they say, we think, he could have gone back out there. He should be fine. We just didn't want to risk it. So you see Maryland transfer Kevis Thomas out there a little bit. He showed some rust there, and a few plays that got let up on his end. By the end of the game, we were seeing some of a freshman, true freshman, Grant Grayson. And then he gets rattled a little bit in that game too. Has to get some medical attention. Just some bad luck in the DB room, but overall, there's still been a lot of emphasis that people feel like the DBs can be a strength of this team. I believe that was something that Ty Bryant said on the UK Healthcare radio show. I think instead of Mark Stoops being on his weekly radio show, they had Bush Hamden, Ty Bryant, some of those guys on there.
Yeah.
Ty said that he still believes that this secondary can be a real strength of the team. He said, not just because I'm in there, but because we got a lot of really strong guys in there. But we'll need to see that get cleaned up as you go into South Carolina. And what South Carolina may lack with an offensive attack right now, we'll see how Lenora Sellers is doing after getting taken out against Vanderbilt. They obviously have a tough test. South Carolina has a tough test on the road at Missouri this week. There's a good chance they're 2-2 by the time they host Kentucky and looking for a bounce back, which, if you know the history of Mark Stoops and bye weeks, could be a concern to go against a team that's looking to have a get-right game against you. But nonetheless, that should be one the Cats don't have any issues taking seriously, and Kentucky is going to have to find its rhythm back defensively against a South Carolina offense that can be good. And it's going to have to keep that same offensive momentum flowing. Going to need a lot out of the Big Blue Wall against a South Carolina defense that, and particularly a South Carolina defensive line that was such a big part of punching UK in the mouth last season with that 31-6, I think it was, victory in week 2 that kind of just started what ended up being a very poor season.
And, Wolfer was there for that. He was, he remembers that whooping. Jagger was there. Farmer was there. There's some guys that, were there in the fire for what they came up to Lexington and were able to do. You make a good point, though. I mean, they got hammered by Vanderbilt. Sellers went out. They were already trailing 14-7 when he went out. So, and that was so weird. That hit did not look overly,
when I saw it, I was kind of like, wait, what happened? And some of the replay angles they showed, I was like, okay, I could see it, but it's still one of those, I've played football. You never know when an injury is going to occur, but it didn't look as egregious as some people made it out to be. And it looked like, for lack of a better term, it kind of looked like, the defender was a bit high up. He's trying to block the pass. So he was a bit stood up a little bit, which drew the targeting when he got the helmet to helmet there. But it looked like, a pretty routine football play, and obviously just kind of rings Sellers' bell there. He goes down as in concussion protocol. Would not expect him to play this weekend against Missouri. We'll see, should be back by the time Kentucky rolls around, 2 weeks, but we'll see, how he's doing, where he's at, where he feels like he is. But like you said, they got kind of hammered by Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's a team that I think might have been a little bit underrated, perhaps, because they're Vanderbilt. But they've looked good, and they've done what they needed to. I would say that they've not looked necessarily consistent, but they've risen to the occasion every chance that they've needed to. They've got a good culture in there with Clark Lee, Diego Pavia, who said he's not coming back for another year. Cleared the rumors on that one. But, they had one AP vote the week prior. I said in my my stock up, stock down piece, I said that one voter must feel really vindicated right now. But now they're number 20 in the nation. So I think they were a little bit underrated. I was a bit shocked, actually, to see South Carolina. I think I've said on this show before, I don't think South Carolina is all that. I thought that they looked quite poor against a Virginia Tech squad that now doesn't have a coach because they fired him after 3 games, just like UCLA. And then they didn't look as good as you'd want them to against an FCS South Carolina State. But to see South Carolina go from number 10 to number 11 to unranked and one, like, 11
Yeah.
to unranked. That was a crazy drop off. So,
Had to
uh,
get Vanderbilt in there somehow.
yeah, a lot of overcorrection we were seeing in the AP poll. So maybe some of the voters saw the hate that was going on the week before with some of those questionable poll, and they're like, all right, I gotta get this correct this week. But oh boy, it was a wild week for movement, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Kentucky's able to respond to South Carolina, which I almost worry that South Carolina was so overrated before they might even go back to being somewhat underrated now, because I don't think South Carolina is necessarily a bad team. I don't think that they're number 10, not even close. I don't think they're number 11. I think that they're more of their ceiling being kind of a, post 15 top 25 team. But they're definitely a team that Kentucky's going to need to take seriously. And for being transparent about things, you lost to Ole Miss, and that was who you beat last year. So you went, what was it, 1-8 in the SEC last year, and the one team you beat last year has beat you this year. So it doesn't matter who it is, you got to win every game you can in the conference.
And you hear both sides of it. You hear guys say that last year doesn't matter. Each year is its own year. The revenge thing doesn't matter because, personnel changes and all that. Lane Kiffin stewed about that as soon as the clock hit zero in
Kiffin,
Oxford.
he admitted in the preseason that they've worked emphasis on Kentucky because of how personal that one was to him. Anyone who
Yeah.
said this, I get it. You want to be a new team. You want to focus on this year's team. There's a lot of guys who were here this year that weren't there last year. Anyone who says last year does not matter is not arguing in good faith. Anyone who says that the guys who are back or the coaches don't care about last year, they're wrong. It's just not true. You think that these coaches didn't get punched in the mouth by South Carolina last year and they're going into it with no hard feelings whatsoever? You think, like you said, Burton and Farmer, those guys who got just pounded up front by that South Carolina defensive line, they're not going into this with feeling like they got something to prove.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys a lot of these guys, even though there is a lot of new faces, played these teams last year, and it is personal for you. I've been there. I've been, in high school. It's a bit different in high school, but we always try to harp that. This year's a new year. Last year doesn't matter, but we had a very, very poor season my junior year and my senior year. But going into my senior year, the emphasis was last year doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what our record was. It doesn't matter who beat us. But as a player, yes, it does. I care. If a team beat the crap out of me last year, it doesn't mean I don't care about other opponents, but that one's personal to me. I want to get my get back on that one. So I think it'll be very interesting to see for South Carolina.
Because that would be in essence saying the whole, it's all about respect. No matter, we've seen Kirby Smart whine about not getting respect, and he's winning national championships at Georgia and all that, at the elite of the elite. But most definitely when a team gets disrespected, whether it's in the media from the noise that they quote unquote don't pay attention to, but even more so if it's another team that, like you said, on the field, that was disrespectful. 31-6, you get taken behind the woodshed, as the old timers like to say. That's what that was. They took you. It came to your house.
You had TV there in Lexington hyping up that matchup. The big stage out there with Feinbaum, the SEC Nation crew.
Yeah.
Everyone was there. That was broadcast everywhere, and you got punched in the mouth. You got pantsed on your own home field, and they did bounce back. They got the win at Ole Miss. They almost beat Georgia. They blew out Ohio. But when the downward spiral really started with that loss to Vanderbilt, which came after a bye week, not trying to say anything, but it did. When that happened, when that downward spiral kind of really started and kept snowballing, it wasn't like where did this come from? We knew where it came from. We saw it in week 2, and it didn't really matter what they did after that. They got some good wins. People thought maybe they could be something, but all of the signs of what ended up being the case last season were on full display in week 2 and on a national stage. So this one, if you're a returning player or a coach and this one isn't a little bit personal to you, I don't really know what to tell you.
Yeah, and that's, that that's what tempered the expectations. All the optimism and we can really it brought all that down. Like, oh, it was deflating, for the fans. Oh, okay, we're not gonna be
Yeah,
ultimately as
I
good
don't
as
think
we
I heard.
thought.
I don't think I
And
heard Atlanta a single time after week two. That died real quick.
and then this summer we flip on any given Saturday. The first time Kentucky's mentioned is when they got beat down by South Carolina because they're following Shane Beamer around and he's jogging through his subdivision and his kids are writing notes on the wall and all that at his house. But the soon as we get mentioned is when we're getting blown out by South Carolina in the documentary. So
Yeah, and I would also mention that that's when they were mentioned. Kentucky didn't really get focused on until near the end of the season, and I get it. It's a documentary; it doesn't really matter. But if I'm Kentucky, if I'm in that coaching staff, it really bothers me that not only was that the first time they got mentioned getting blown out, they were an afterthought in that episode. They were just that's the team that South Carolina went and blew out. They didn't
yeah,
even really mention anything about Kentucky in that game. It
yeah,
was purely just, yeah, South Carolina went there and whooped them. Let's move on to like a storyline that actually matters.
yeah,
That would bother me. That would eat me alive. That most of my references in this show about the entire season is just an afterthought until you give us, you throw them a bone at the end there and give them a little storyline. The same we did Mississippi State, hyping up a game that they lost.
yeah.
But I also think you have to focus on too. We're focusing so much on last year, and that's rightfully so. It was a beatdown. But even 2 years ago, back in South Carolina, that
Yeah.
was when Kentucky was leading. Kentucky felt like it had it in the bag, and then the South Carolina late touchdown to win it. I've said this. I know my predecessor Aaron, I believe, saw it. We did the post game media for that. Stoops was very upset. Didn't have a ton of words. We left the press room. We did our kind of like our TV stand up on the field. And we walked back. Mark Stoops was sitting in the hallway area, just sitting on the ground, like knees up. You know what I mean? Not like curled up in a ball or anything, not like that, but like just like I don't want to use the word defeated because I don't want to ever put that kind of implication on him, but you could tell that was a gut punch to this staff 2 years ago when they thought they had that game won in Columbia, when they thought they were getting that road SEC win against South Carolina, kind of getting back Shane Beamer, and then to get popped, just punched in the gut right at the end there with that touchdown. That one hurt. And then you add on to that hurt, them coming into your house the very next year, punching you in the mouth again, just absolutely, taking your lunch money, for lack of a better term, in Lexington. Shane Beamer's kind of had Kentucky's number, and that has to eat you alive a little bit. Listen, I think Shane Beamer's a likable guy. He came off well in the documentary. He seems nice in all of his press conferences, but there's a lot of Kentucky fans out there who absolutely despise him. And I understand why, quite frankly. I understand why. And this is one that I think even more than just the season, personally, if you're Kentucky, you need to beat South Carolina at South Carolina.
And I don't think Stoops cares for him. He said what he said about the sunglasses. And then if I'm Shane Beamer, I absolutely pull my glasses out when I beat you.
Yeah, I mean, why would you not,
You
right?
don't want him to beat him, and then that keeps him from doing all that kind of stuff. Oh, you mentioned Kentucky being an afterthought in the documentary, and because they're not even mentioned. They get blown out and move on. It reminds me on the basketball side, and I said this when Aaron was here. We got Jalen Lowe from Pitt running the point, and all we've heard is he was on a terrible team. He had to take all the shots, and shot clock running down, and he had to do everything because Pitt was terrible. Pitt sucks. I was like, Pitt has caught so many strays from Jalen Lowe coming to Kentucky. If I'm them, if I'm not motivated to have a better year just to get that out of my mouth, because that's all. When Pitt was so terrible, his stats are so distorted because he was the offense and he had nobody around him. I'm like, if Pitt doesn't get their life together this year, they never will because all they did was just catch strays. Nothing, no positive light shined on their program at all since we knew Jalen Lowe was coming. I'm like, God, those guys are just caught grief for
Yeah,
months.
that always kind of caught me a little bit, I keep up with college basketball is obviously my bread and butter. That's what I love. That's what I care a lot about. I'm the kind of guy who will sit down and watch Elon Queens. Shout out, they're merging, by the way, on a random Wednesday night on ESPN Plus. So had to throw in some way to reference the Elon Queens merger. First time I think ever two D1 teams are merging and keeping the teams separate. Not like there's other schools that have satellite campuses at D1, but these are two D1 schools that are merging into one school with two campuses and keeping their own branding. Anyway, weird little point there. But anyway, yeah, it's funny how that works out, right? I found it a bit odd because I keep up with college basketball very closely, love me some bracketology, some predictions. Pitt was kind of loosely on the bubble conversation for a lot of the season last year. I mean, they were pretty much out of it relatively before March, but they weren't like the worst team in the world. It looks so much worse because of what Jalen Lowe had to do. And it is funny how that works with the transfer portal and fan bases because let's be honest, I get that they're the same conference now, but was Kentucky, Oklahoma really a rivalry before Otega Owe? Not really. And now that Kentucky fans are out here talking crazy against Oklahoma, Oklahoma is going to want to get theirs back against Otega Owe. So the transfer portal creates all these kind of funny scenarios. Pitt catching just crazy strays, Oklahoma, Kentucky being weirdly a personal rivalry game now. I mean, they're almost getting in a fight after the game there, craziness how that works out. But
Yeah.
I kind of love it for college sports.
Yeah, it's just so funny. I mean, everybody's just off the top rope on Pitt since he's come. It's just wow how that worked, man. But if they don't, if the Pitt staff isn't motivated this year, they're never gonna be. Oh man. In addition to the home win over Eastern Michigan, we had the UK Athletics Hall of Fame induction. Josh Hines Allen in town. Carl Anthony Towns in town. Doug Flynn won world championships with the Big Red Machine in the 70s. He's a good guy, and he should have been in a long time ago. He's still on the broadcast with Dick Gabriel. I've had him on other podcasts. He's just a good dude, man. Just a good dude with stories for days from, old school baseball. And Kentucky is Reds country anyway, for the most part. The bulk of the state roots for Cincinnati, Reds, Bengals, and all that. For it's their prerogative. Me neither. Sonia Hahn was also inducted. And am I leaving somebody out? I'm skipping.
Yeah, Abby Cheek Ramsey.
And yes. So you covered the whole event, man. So what was that evening like, man?
A whole lot of waiting to see if Josh Allen and Karl Anthony Towns showed up, to be honest with you. We knew Cat was in town. We saw the post, but there was a lot of questions whether Josh was going to be there or not. Obviously, pretty busy with his NFL schedule, them at Cincinnati. But nonetheless, no, it was great. I always think it's really special. I talked about it on radio earlier this week, but we spend so much of our time covering these teams and these athletes and telling their stories, but especially when it comes to some of these smaller sports, like a Sonia Hahn at women's tennis or Abby Cheek Ramsey in softball, it's really easy to get in the habit of, covering these teams year after year after year. And so many athletes come through Kentucky. Every year rosters look different. People transfer, people graduate, people leave, It's easy to lose track of some of these people, and I think it's really special to have a kind of thing like this where you go and catch up, because the biggest thing to me, obviously some of these people, Doug Flynn, Sonia Hahn, a bit before my time, but even things like Michaela Epps and Karl Anthony Towns and Josh Allen, it's such a fun opportunity to be like, hey, remember when this happened, or hey, remember that play, and to go back on it. And the gratitude that they all have, the love they all have for Kentucky is something so special. Hearing those athletes reflect on their journeys, where they're at, what they've become at the University of Kentucky versus when they started. I mean, Michaela Epps had arguably, in my opinion, my favorite quote of the night. She said, I came to Kentucky and I was Anthony Epps' daughter. And now I'm sitting here a Hall of Famer, and Anthony Epps is Michaela Epps' dad. It doesn't get much better than that at Kentucky. And And also, you can just tell what Kentucky means to them. Michaela Epps said, like, to this day, one of her biggest regrets is that she couldn't bring a national championship to the women's basketball team, the way her dad helped get Kentucky a national championship on the men's side. Uh, you know,
He still lets her know too. He still
he
lets her
does.
know.
He does. Um, Carl Anthony Towns said he's a multi-millionaire playing in the NBA, but he said this isn't my accomplishment. This is my team's accomplishment because I wouldn't be here without them. That the love he has for Doug Flynn, obviously a Lexingtonian, talked about his love for the city, his love for the area. I think he's living here still. Moved back here after his professional career. He's in 5 Hall of Fames now. That's kind of crazy. But all of these guys, Josh talked about probably really being the face of what Mark Stoops has built here at Kentucky and what he did. So it's really special to reflect on a lot of these journeys and see where they're at, and to talk to some of these athletes who, at one point were at the height of what was going on. There was a time where I never got to cover any of them as a reporter, but there was a time when, if you were a reporter covering Kentucky, these were the people you were talking to week in, week out, week in, week out. And now that, we get to sit here and talk to them as they're, solidified into the all-time greats of the university.
And I always look, you have your every year, every class, you have your quote unquote headliners. You have a Jody Meeks, you have, Keenan Burton, guys like that, from the major sports or whatever you want to say. But Sonia Hahn, Abby Cheek, Coach Lawson's been doing her thing in softball for years. But, Sonia Hahn, women's tennis, when you have someone from swimming and diving, they work just as hard to hone their craft as the Josh Allens, as the Carl Anthony Towns, as the athletes who get to show off what they can do at Kroger Field, Rupp Arena, Kentucky Proud Park, things of that nature, where the crowds are a lot bigger, the cheers are a lot louder. That does not diminish the career they had in their sport. She's a Hall of Famer, rightfully so. She busted her behind just as much on the tennis court as Kat, as Doug Flynn, as Josh Hines Allen. And so to see them get recognized too is always good, because we root for Kentucky and everything. The tennis match doesn't draw the same attendance wise as the football game, but they're still, and look, men's tennis is doing well, and we see volleyball and all these sports. But those athletes to get recognized when they get the call for the Hall of Fame too, I always enjoy seeing them and getting to hear what they say too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really needs to be said, just, not to, obviously I try to be impartial in my coverage, but the University of Kentucky really does just have a great top to bottom athletic department in terms of some of those coaches and some of those players and some of the talent they have and the programs they've built there. I mean, that's where I got my start with the student newspaper. The first game I ever covered was women's soccer. That was with Ian Carey, who would go on to be fired in favor of Troy Fabiano. But Troy's a great guy. I've got his phone number. He's got mine. We've talked a few times on the phone. He's happy to set up some interviews, giving me great access to that program. Always happy to talk to me about what's going on and what they're building there. Men's soccer, Johan Sedergren. I've chatted with Johan Sedergren completely outside of UK settings. Back when I was working at Lexington Sporting Club, he stopped by. We had great conversations. He was talking to me, we'll get you out to practice, anything you want to see, anyone you want to talk to, all of that. I shouted out, I think a few weeks ago, Harry Mullins on the rifle team, always been wonderful to me. Cedric Kaufman, the tennis coach, always been wonderful to me, always been wonderful to my reporters. He built up a really great rapport with one of my good friends now, former reporter Sarah Gibson, who loves tennis. That she's always going to these Cincinnati Opens and all that stuff. And anytime they see each other, they have a whole conversation. And, but Kaufman's the kind of coach, when she graduated, the very next year we had a new reporter out there and he asked, like, hey, where's Sarah at?
Wow.
So these coaches from top to bottom at this university are just wonderful people and wonderful program builders. And there's so much great athletes, great talent, great people in these programs. And I think it's a testament to the overall department that Kentucky has. Obviously we all love Mark Pope. Obviously, opinions might be mixed on Stoops right now. He's always been very respectful to me, always been very, helpful to me when I needed something. But Nick Mingione, obviously a great guy. But when you really go down the list, I mean, there's not a whole lot of coaches out there who aren't, really,
Hmm.
really solid people who are really gonna do what the best they can to help you cover their team. And I think that that's really special.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And gotta give a shout to another Kentuckian too, Michael Eves, who we see on SportsCenter every night. Um, was back because he was inducted into the University of Kentucky Hall of Distinguished Alumni. So he's a friend of this podcast. If you go to Twitter, see the episode pin where we had him on and talked about the Masters and uh, his time in Hopkins County and his high school days and UK Jam School and all that. So congratulations to him coming back and getting recognized, and just a big, fun, widespread Kentucky type of weekend. The football game happened, but there was a lot of other stuff going on, UK related as well. So it was a really good weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big weekend in terms of recognition for the university, and obviously to be able to cap that off, honoring a lot of those guys. Obviously, the UK Athletics Hall of Famers were at halftime of the Eastern Michigan game, minus Cat, and I believe he had to get back for the Knicks camp starting up soon. Josh Hines Allen had to be in Cincinnati doing some Jaguars things with his head coach. Might have heard of him, Liam Cohen.
Yeah.
Uh, but recognizing those guys, having the distinguished alumni recognition going on as well this past weekend, getting the big win. It was a really special weekend for Kentucky, and I think it was a great thing for the fan base to have.
Yeah, it definitely was. Liam and Trevor Lawrence butting heads a little bit. Like Liam telling him to, hit your receiver in the chest, maybe not throw so high. And Trevor just waving him off, saying, "If you keep it up, I'm going to call Dabo. Don't make me call Dabo."
Well, even Dabo, did you see what he said? Like going off on, I think, the press or something like that.
Yeah,
Like, people
yeah,
want me gone. What, are they tired of winning or something like that? Like,
yeah.
it's a mess right now. College sports and pro sports. It's never sleeps. It's just always something, week in, week out.
Yeah. Oh, and real quick too, before we get over here, uh, I don't, I don't even know if it was savage like that, but on the Collins show, you mentioned that Bush Hannon was on there, and Ty Bryant and Josh Caddis, and I forget Tom asked Josh something, and he was about Derek Shea, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's cleaned up a whole lot of stuff." I was like, "Oh,
Yeah, he's.
ooh,
I believe, actually, I don't even think Tom brought it up. I think Josh brought up the coach. So something interesting there. I think that might have been a shot, and I think that's kind of funny getting a shot from Josh Caddis, because he's not really that kind of guy that often that's going to throw shots like that. He's a
yeah,
very, he called Cutter Boley a golden retriever, I believe. He's doing Dancing with the Stars. He got asked about that on the Collins show.
yeah,
Uh, but no, it sounded to me, I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, not trying to make it something that's not. Sounded like a shot to me. I threw in a little joke in my stock up, like my stock report for opponents. I said Kentucky, looking at all of Kentucky's opponents and what they did this past week, whether their stock went up, stock went down. I said Louisville stayed the same. They were on a bye week, but I said I was tempted to move them down just because of how good the tight ends are playing after Quincy left. But no, yeah, that was interesting. I caught that. That one, I was listening. I think I was doing something on my computer and I was listening. I stopped what I was doing and got
yeah,
the. If I was a dog, I guess my ear would have perked up. But I was like, like I heard
exactly.
that one, and that did make me laugh a little bit.
Yeah, and like you said, it's just the way he talks. He's not nothing vindictive in his tone, but he at the same time he said what he said.
He
So
said what he said. He said what he said. The tight ends have looked better this year than they have in a long time.
yeah, leading the team in receptions. Do the receivers bounce back and jump ahead of them? And if so, how many weeks from now?
I say yes, but not necessarily because I think the tight ends will take a step back. I think, one, you have to take into account that You're going to be going against SEC defensive lines, so you might be needing some of those tight ends to do some blocking, especially against like South Carolina, which has a really strong one. When you're facing Georgia, you're probably going to need tight ends doing their blocking. You might see one block, one go out. I still think the tight ends will be a part of the offense. They've been such a good part of it so far, and obviously being roommates, they have a great connection with Cutter Boley. But I do think we started to get some wide receivers, making some flashes in that game. We saw that great play from Fred Farrier. Jamori Macklin got involved. We saw Kendrick Law should have had a touchdown. I believe or was it Jamori that should have had? No, I think it was Kendrick that should have had a touchdown that got taken back by a holding. But that same offender, Hardly Gilmore, had 48 yards of 2 catches. We saw a lot of those guys start getting more involved. Obviously, Troy Stillato's still been kind of limited a little bit. I'm not quite positive what his deal is right now. I think he might be a little bit banged up, but we'll see. But I think we're starting to see a lot of those guys really start to come into their own, get more comfortable in what's going on. And, any team that wants to be anything, you're going to have to make adjustments. So see what's working, what's not working. And I think that that's something that Bush is looking at. He's kind of seemed to indicate that, like, we got to keep doing what works and focus on what works and kind of make some adjustments where they're needed. So maybe you move some of those guys to different spots. I do think we'll see a lot more out of the wide receivers. And I think maybe a little bit concerning it's week 3, but we're finally starting to see some of those guys really emerge as, main targets. And as you say that, Kendrick Law is obviously seeming like he's emerging as kind of a number one kind of guy. Jamori is very talented. We've seen Hardly Gilmore make some big explosive plays. Fred Farrier had an explosive play, and that's not even counting. We didn't see anything out of JJ Hester, who almost had a really big explosive play in that first game before it got taken back. Troy Stellato, that same guy, almost had a pretty big reception that ended up being ruled a drop after it was overturned. There's a lot of guys in that room, and I think that we're starting to see them get more involved. And, we'll see how the quarterback play continues as we go forward, how it transitions into a tougher defense, how much, time Cutter or Zach will have back there in the pocket against some of these SEC defenses. But I do think the wide receivers will get more involved there. And I think the tight ends might take a step back, if only just because they might be needed more in blocking. But I do think we'll still see tight ends pretty consistently throughout the season making some of those big plays. I mean, even if it's Eastern Michigan, you don't see Josh Caddis and Willie Rodriguez getting these 30-yard gains and then just be like, we're not going to use them anymore. So, and even that, Henry Boyer looks pretty good too. So we'll see how that group continues going forward. I expect to still see them, but I do we might see them take a step back as they're needed more in blocking with some of these really, really strong front lines in the SEC. Even Texas, for all of its offensive issues, still has a really strong defense. So see how that looks. But I'm optimistic about the wide receivers, and I'm confident in the tight ends.
So yeah, let the defense force the defense to take your tight ends away. Don't just stop using them, since they are being very productive. Most production we've seen out of them in several years. Been hoping for this for years, especially you look on Twitter and the online. Everybody's been waiting for this, and it's not an excuse. You have a bunch of new receivers and a new position coach, so that's still trying to get to know these guys and figure out who to use where. And you thought, like you said, it would have maybe happened before now, but I always like talking with position coaches. I've talked with Coach Collins before, because you got to balance. There's a reason they called him and hired you. He came from Georgia State, I think. Stoops wanted you to come in and coach DBs. He's a DB guy. Then at the same time, you try to be yourself, but you got to acclimate to a new staff and a new boss. But he called you for what you had done. That's why you caught his eye in the first place, and he appreciated the work you did. So it's always that kind of a tightrope to me in the first year. And I think Coach Washington might be, doing that, working for a new coordinator, new receivers, and they all do it. I mean, they're not the only guys on staff doing this, but that process always, to me, takes a while to sort itself out. And it's something that I think fans don't even really think about because it's behind the scenes, and everybody just expects it to, hey, go smooth. We hired him, come in, coach him up, but it's just not that easy.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect, I think a lot of fans don't think much deeper than coordinators when it comes to position groups. I would guess if you went out in the middle of a Kentucky game and asked every fan in the stands who is the wide receivers coach, you wouldn't get that many LaDainian Washingtons. But nonetheless, I also think part of that too is, like you said, adjusting to this new system, but also I think it's something that is a good thing for the team. I had a really good conversation with him at a practice, I think last week before the Eastern Michigan game. And he kind of almost went to he's older than him, so I don't know. I'm saying he went to his school, but almost went to the Seth McGowan school of responding to questions about his performance. He's very much so I don't really care what it looks like as long as the team wins at the end of the day. That's what matters. He said, look, our guys are going to do whatever they have to. We try to prioritize doing your job. He said, if our job is to go make 20 catches, then we better go make 20 catches. But sometimes our job is going to be to block 70 times a game. And you know what we're going to do then? We're going to go block 70 times a game. He said, sometimes it's making 20 catches. Sometimes it's making no catches. As long as you do your job and the team wins, that's what we care about. And I think that's an important thing for this team as a whole, but for that group, I think that it's easy, especially if you're a more casual football fan, to be like, why are the wide receivers not doing this or that? Why is JJ Hester not getting open on this play? Maybe JJ Hester's goal on this play is not to get open. Maybe he's doing something else, because sometimes people think they forget about those wide receivers as blockers sometimes, especially creating some of those lanes. And he seemed to put a lot of focus on the wide receivers doing their job. And he touched on that as well with the call against Ole Miss that, Mark Stoops wanted a false start on, I believe, Jamori Macklin. They ended up calling it an illegal formation on that play that got taken back. And, when he was asked about it, I think he also thought that Jamori kind of pointed and should have been fine. But he said at the end of the day, it was close. And our job as a receiver is to not make it close. So regardless of what the right call was, that's on us. And that's the kind of mindset that room has. And I think that it's easy to want to see some of those big flashy plays from some of those guys. It's easy to want to see, it's easy to want Seth McGowan to be out here talking up his accomplishments in the same way. But at the end of the day, if you're Kentucky coming off of last year's 4-8 season, you went out and you got guys to the best of your ability that are focused on winning above all else. And that's what McGowan said after Ole Miss. He had, I believe, 2 touchdowns in that one. He said, I don't think the state of Kentucky is very happy that one player might have played okay. He said after the Eastern Michigan game, he got 3 touchdowns. He said, I said last week I didn't care my performance. I don't care about my performance this week either. I care that we got the win. So it seems like the wide receivers, at least their coach and that room, a lot of those guys have that same kind of mindset, just focused on whatever's going to get the team to a win. And I think that can only mean good things for the team going forward. Whether or not it translates or not, we'll see. But it's easy to want more from the wide receivers, but it's harder to know football in the way that you say, okay, I wanted to see something more here, but I also understand that maybe they weren't going for something more here. Maybe what they were going for is exactly what they did.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. The whole big picture thing, and to get that out of wide receivers, that's impressive anyway, because the stereotypical wide receiver, I'm open every play, I'm a diva, and this route works, it all works, just throw me the ball. Typical me first guys is what a lot of people think of when they think about wideouts. So being a decoy or running the concept here to get something open over there, setting up something for the third quarter, what you're doing.
That's something I'd even touch on. I played defense and offense, but on defense, I played defense. I don't know where I was going with that, but the point is, from a defensive perspective, there's a lot of things you look at, and I didn't even touch on that from the wide receivers perspective. Sometimes your goal is blocking, sometimes your goal is getting open to make a catch, but like you just said, sometimes your goal is quite literally just to be a decoy. I also played tight end on offense. I ran some routes from time to time. Sometimes your goal is not to get open. Sometimes your goal is, all right, I need you to run this, so the safety is going to look that way, and then we're going to have something open over here, all right? Sometimes you are just the bait, and that's how it goes sometimes. If that is your job, go be the bait. Make it look convincing. Make it look like you're going to catch that ball and bring the safety over here, get the corner on you, try to force that double team if they think we're going there, and then maybe we got someone wide open over the middle. And that maybe that person's a tight end. Who knows? But, I think that there's so much that goes into being a wide receiver beyond just get open, catch ball, that goes unnoticed. And I think there's a lot of football that goes unnoticed. I mean, when you really get into it, football strategy and individual defensive schemes and offensive identity, it's really complex stuff. I've got a book on my shelf over here that I'm going to be reading shortly called Football and Philosophy, looking at how philosophy, like human philosophy and football kind of intertwine sometimes and how complex it gets. But like you just said with the wide receivers, sometimes, you're looking to make a play, but a lot of times in terms of an offensive scheme and maybe what Kentucky's doing, maybe you're just trying to draw the defense somewhere. Maybe you're trying to get a block. Maybe you're trying to create lanes somewhere. Trying to shape the defense in a way that benefits your offense. And I think a lot of that goes very, very unnoticed.
Think about Van Howes, who played for Kentucky, and you see him everywhere now. But he does the cut ups on his own Twitter account, and he has the show with Anthony White, former Cat. I had both of them on here in the past. Now he's doing a lot of stuff for KSR. He's from Baton Rouge, and he was on some bad '90s Kentucky's teams. I mean, it was some lean years, but he in high school. He said, "I'm the trivia question. I'm the only dude to ever pick off Peyton Manning in high school and in college." And he described the play at Kentucky. I think in one of the intros of one of his shows, he even has the clip because Peyton is looking right, and then backside is always wide open, and Van just sneaks in and jumps it and gets the pick from the backside. And he said Peyton came up to him after the game like, "How in the world did you? That's never covered. It never happens." And then Van's a real cerebral dude, and he went into why, based on this and this formation, and as to why he knew where Peyton was going to go, because this is where I go, because this is where it's always open, because we're manipulating you over here. But he didn't fall for that cheese, and it was fascinating. And Peyton's a big egghead and a big nerd too, and for him to get outsmarted by Van, because he never thought in his wildest dreams from the way he talked that the DB is going to jump that, because but yeah, it's just like you said, it's just fascinating stuff. And life is the same way, but just that whole cat and mouse. In this case, Van got the better of Peyton in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, I always love seeing those plays where a defender, whether it's a linebacker or a corner, smells off a screen and is able to just get like the easiest pick six you've ever seen, catching a ball in the backfield, something like that. But I think that it's easy to look at football. Granted, some people want to watch football this way. Some people just want to see the car crash, the chaos. They don't want to think too much about it. That's all fine. No one, I'm a sports reporter, so I'm not going to do that. But I think I read Mike Leach's autobiography, and I know I read it. I'm saying I think he said it in the book. He obviously went to law school at Pepperdine, I believe, and you hear a lot of people say it, but football in a lot of ways is more akin to a chess match than it is a car crash. Like, yeah, you got these guys running at each other, a bunch of hits, hard time, but it's really a game about trying to outsmart the other team on both sides of the ball. Defense, you're trying to say, all right, what are they going to throw at us? What are they going to do? And how can we counter it? Offense, you're like, where do I think they're going to be? What are they looking for? How can I get a fast one on them? And I think it's really fascinating to watch and to break down some of these schemes. I actually love what Van does. I always take the time to watch his videos. I love when he is like stopping a play and like highlighting things in the screen, showing like, all right, well, here's this. And like, if this is what's going on, he needs to do this. Instead, he does this. It's very informative, and not everybody wants that kind of content. I love it. And if it is something you're interested in, I would highly recommend you going and checking out his stuff. He does great stuff there. He did a really good one, I think, on Zach Calzada's interception against Toledo, and kind of pointed out how it was less on Zach than it was maybe the wide receivers in that case, saying like, if you're a wide receiver, these are things you cannot let happen. That did happen. But I think it's very interesting to see, and that kind of side of the game is underappreciated in a lot of ways.
Yeah, sure. To try to get Van on here if he's got time with everything else he's just taking on. But if he, it's always, you're gonna learn something. It's a fun guy to talk to for sure. As are you, Cole Park. So BBN, check out all of his stuff at the Cat's Paws. Got the bye week coming up. Like you said, did some volleyball stuff the other day. Football and basketball crisscrossing each other. It's right around the corner. We got a Saturday Big Blue Madness coming up. They did pick it on a bye week Saturday, so that was cool of them. It was like to really That would really. You think Mark Stoops, how pissed he'd be if they had Big Blue Madness on a game day, a football game day Saturday. But that is not the case. The second bye week is when Big Blue Madness is. So look, everybody check out Cole's work between now and then. We got a off week. You get the Gamecocks coming up. Time for a little redemption, even though they don't believe in revenge. They will definitely try to get last year out of their mouth. So, everybody, we appreciate you taking the time to watch, listen, give 5 stars, rate, review, subscribe to the show. We definitely appreciate you helping us grow. And we will jump back in here on these airwaves a few days from now. And if Cole is traveling and out and about, I'll do it solo or get a guest or something like that. But we'll definitely enjoy your coverage from Williams Bryce Stadium. And we'll do some more Cole's cooking. We'll talk about that again in a future episode as well. For the YouTube people, hey, YouTube people, y'all check it out. Oh, look at that. Just gourmet stuff all the time. So enjoyed it, man. And appreciate you as always. And we'll do this again. It's been a Believe in Kentucky for Cole Park. This is Vinny Hardy. Go Cats. We'll see y'all next time.